2012, a quiet teenager from Essex stepped onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent, and in under 4 minutes, Jonathan Antoine went from anonymous to unforgettable. His performance of The Prayer alongside Charlotte Jacklinelli became an instant sensation, racking up millions of views, triggering standing ovations, and leaving judges speechless. Simon Cowell called him unbelievable. Social media crowned him the next Pavarotti. American audiences tuned in via YouTube and viral clips embraced him like a hometown hero. But while the world was captivated by The Voice, they missed something far more important: the cost of that moment. What America's Got Talent viewers never saw, because it wasn't their stage and it wasn't their story, was the emotional weight Jonathan carried backstage. Beneath the soaring tenor was a 17-year-old still learning to like his own reflection, still struggling with anxiety so severe it almost kept him from auditioning. In press interviews, he later confessed that his nerves were crippling, his self-image non-existent, and his public persona a shell he built to survive the storm. His rise wasn't just unexpected, it was overwhelming. Overnight, the boy who once whispered through classes was now a headline. And while the media spun a Cinderella story, the truth was messier. He wasn't ready. He didn't feel worthy. And unlike most talent show stars chasing attention, Jonathan seemed to retreat from it. After the show, while his music career blossomed, his public appearances became more calculated, his interviews more careful. To many in the United States, Jonathan Antoine simply faded from the spotlight. But the reality is that he was never chasing it to begin with. Instead, he was navigating something much more fragile: how to protect himself in a world that only saw his voice, not the boy behind it. What unfolded next wasn't captured on talent show cameras, and it wasn't written in fan blogs. Because what happened wasn't a scandal, it was a revelation. And it started with Jonathan looking in the mirror and deciding to change everything. For all the thunderous applause and global praise, Jonathan Antoine's fiercest battles weren't fought on stage. They were fought in silence, far from the cameras, in dressing rooms, hotel mirrors, and his own mind. While fans were busy comparing him to Luciano Pavarotti or Andrea Bocelli, Jonathan was comparing himself to the version of success the world seemed to expect: thin, polished, unshakably confident. And he didn't see himself in any of it. In interviews following his Britain's Got Talent fame, Jonathan would later admit that he hated how he looked and that stepping into the spotlight with deep insecurities about his weight and appearance made the fame feel more like a burden than a blessing. The pressure wasn't just external. Internally, Jonathan was unraveling. He described moments of panic before performances, spiraling self-doubt even after delivering near-perfect renditions, and a constant mental war between gratitude for his talent and discomfort with being seen. He became a symbol of vocal excellence, but also unintentionally a mirror for society's obsession with appearances. The media often praised his unlikely success, a backhanded compliment that implied someone who looked like Jonathan shouldn't be capable of what he could do. And whether they meant to or not, those words cut deep. Fans adored him, but Jonathan couldn't yet adore himself. Slowly, quietly, he began to change. Not for the cameras, not for industry image, but for survival. He started focusing on his health, not as a quest for vanity, but for stability. He adjusted his diet, introduced exercise, and began to take more control over his mental well-being. In the years that followed, Jonathan lost several stone, not with dramatic announcements or product sponsorships, but through steady personal progress. This transformation wasn't just physical, it was foundational. He was learning, perhaps for the first time, that worth wasn't tied to a scale or a headline. And that maybe, just maybe, the path to real confidence wasn't through applause, but through acceptance. Yet even as his reflection changed, one question lingered beneath it all. Why had he always felt so different? Why did the spotlight feel heavier on him than it did on others? The answer wouldn't come from a vocal coach or a therapist. It would arrive a decade later in the form of a diagnosis that made everything make sense. In 2022, nearly a decade after Jonathan Antoine's meteoric rise on Britain's Got Talent, the world finally learned something that cast his entire journey in a new light, something even his most loyal fans never saw coming. In a quiet, heartfelt statement, Jonathan revealed that he had been diagnosed with autism. For some, it was a surprise. For others, it was a missing puzzle piece. And for Jonathan, it was a moment of profound clarity. Suddenly, the stage fright, the sensory overwhelm, the intense focus, the emotional depth, all of it began to make sense. Autism, he explained, wasn't a label he feared, but a lens through which he finally understood himself. For years, Jonathan had lived in a world that demanded he adapt, quickly, publicly, and often painfully. But while audiences marveled at his voice, few knew how much energy it took for him to simply exist in high-pressure, overstimulating environments. The flashing lights, the noise, the crowds, the interviews. It wasn't just difficult, it was exhausting. The autism diagnosis didn't change who he was. It revealed who he had always been. In interviews following the announcement, Jonathan spoke candidly about the emotional toll of undiagnosed neurodivergence in a career built on performance and perception. He described years of masking, hiding his discomfort, scripting conversations, forcing himself to act normal in situations that felt anything but. But more importantly, he talked about the freedom that came after the diagnosis. It gave him permission to slow down, to say no, to prioritize health over hustle. And perhaps for the first time, he could build a life that actually fit him, not one squeezed into the mold of a celebrity archetype. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Fans flooded his pages with messages of solidarity, many sharing their own stories of late diagnoses, of feeling different their whole lives. Jonathan had always connected with people through his voice. Now he was connecting through something even more powerful: vulnerability. His story wasn't just about triumph, it was about truth. But as his understanding of himself deepened, so did the curiosity around him. Because now the world wasn't just asking, what's Jonathan Antoine's next album? They were wondering, with this new self-awareness, was he about to reinvent everything? And to answer that, we have to look beyond opera and into the sounds that shaped him in private. For most people, the name Jonathan Antoine conjures images of velvet tuxedos, grand orchestras, and the thunderous swell of classical arias. But behind that polished tenor exterior lies a far less conventional soundtrack, one that sounds more like a rock festival than a royal concert hall. It's a part of his story that few fans, especially those introduced to him through Britain's Got Talent, ever expected. Because while Jonathan built a career on bel canto and ballads, his personal playlists tell a different tale entirely. In candid interviews, he's confessed to being a longtime fan of heavy metal, progressive rock, and what he calls aggressively complex music. Bands like Dream Theater, Opeth, and even extreme metal acts have been named among his favorites, not as guilty pleasures, but as genuine artistic influences. And that revelation shook a few expectations. How could the same man who silences opera houses with Puccini also unwind with guttural riffs and blast beats? For Jonathan, the answer is simple: intensity. Both opera and metal, he explains, share an emotional extremity, raw, theatrical, unapologetically dramatic. It's not about genre. It's about expression. And for someone like Jonathan, who feels the world more deeply than most, those extremes are where he feels most alive. This musical duality isn't just quirky trivia, it's a window into his creative psyche. And it has fans speculating. Could Jonathan be preparing for a genre crossover? Might he someday blend his operatic voice with symphonic metal or progressive fusion? Some even imagine a Jonathan Antoine Goes Rock album, a bold hybrid that marries classical technique with electric chaos. But whether or not such a project ever materializes, one thing is certain: Jonathan is no longer boxed in by industry expectations. He listens widely, he thinks differently, and he's built a relationship with music that's far more layered than what award shows and chart rankings capture. To the world, he may still be the angelic tenor, but in his headphones, he's something else entirely. And that raises a deeper question, not just about what kind of music he sings, but what kind of artist he's becoming. Because when a performer starts blurring lines between genres, it's often a sign of something bigger, a reinvention. And Jonathan Antoine's next act just might surprise everyone, including himself. When Jonathan Antoine made the decision to part ways with Charlotte Giaconelli in 2014, it wasn't just the end of a musical partnership. It was the beginning of an era defined by independence, risk, and a quiet but radical shift in how he wanted to exist in the public eye. For many fans, the duo from Britain's Got Talent was inseparable, their chemistry as undeniable as their harmonies. But behind the scenes, Jonathan was already wrestling with an identity that needed space to evolve. Going solo wasn't a betrayal. It was survival. His debut solo album, Tenor, landed with critical praise and fanfare, proving that his voice, on its own, was more than enough. Follow-up releases like Believe 2016 and Going the Distance 2020 deepened that impression, each one more nuanced and daring than the last. But with each album came another surprising move. Jonathan began stepping away from the spotlight, not toward it. While other performers in his position would have chased interviews, endorsements, or stadium tours, Jonathan's appearances became more deliberate, more spaced out, more curated. And it wasn't because of lack of demand, quite the opposite. Jonathan Antoine was charting, trending, selling out shows. But he wasn't interested in playing the fame game. He had learned, perhaps faster than most, that notoriety didn't equate to peace. So instead of chasing headlines, he built boundaries. He stopped oversharing. He trimmed interviews. He said no more often. And behind those decisions was a simple goal: to protect what he loved most, the music, the art, and himself. Even as his voice matured and deepened, so did his sense of who he wanted to be. Not a pop puppet, not a viral sensation, but an artist. One with limits, integrity, and the courage to turn down opportunities that didn't align with his values. To many, his growing privacy was puzzling. But to those paying closer attention, it was a bold declaration. Jonathan Antoine wasn't here to entertain us at the cost of his well-being. He was rewriting the rules of what it meant to be a public figure. And as he pulled back from the noise, speculation only grew louder. What else was he keeping from the world? In a world where fame is often measured by how loudly you live online, Jonathan Antoine has become a quiet anomaly, a global voice who has kept his personal life almost entirely off the record. And that silence? It's intentional. While many artists post daily glimpses into their relationships, routines, or real estate, Jonathan remains elusive. There are no home tours, no Instagram love declarations, no TikToks from tropical vacations. In fact, outside of his music and select interviews, you'd be hard-pressed to find anything that reveals who Jonathan Antoine is when the mic is off. That's not to say the public hasn't tried. Fans have speculated for years about his relationship status. Past rumors hinted at a long-distance romance with someone named Michelle, but that trail went cold just as quickly as it surfaced. There's been no official confirmation of a partner, no engagements, no scandals, just silence. And in today's hyper-connected celebrity economy, that's more than unusual. It's practically revolutionary. The same mystery extends to his living situation. Despite earning millions through albums and tours, there's no record of luxury properties, no appearances in lifestyle magazines, and no evidence of an extravagant lifestyle. If Jonathan Antoine owns a mansion, he's never flaunted it. If he drives a flashy car, it's never been photographed. What little we do know comes from snippets: his continued connection to Essex, his appreciation for solitude, and his preference for spending time away from urban chaos. Some might interpret this guardedness as aloofness, but to those who truly follow his journey, it's an act of preservation. After years of having his body, voice, and image dissected by the media, Jonathan has drawn a bold line between the artist and the man. He shares what he chooses, nothing more. In a time when vulnerability is often monetized, Jonathan's restraint is its own form of rebellion. But it also fuels the fire of curiosity. What is he hiding? What don't we know? And most of all, is something big brewing just out of view? With an artist as reserved and unpredictable as Jonathan Antoine, it's no surprise that rumors have often filled the gaps left by his silence. The less he shares, the more fans and the media speculate. Is he secretly preparing a genre-bending rock crossover? Will he suddenly reappear on global television in a bold new role? Is he dating someone famous under the radar? Or is he quietly working on the biggest musical reinvention of his career? Over the past few years, forums, fan pages, and even some gossip blogs have tried to answer those questions with wild theories. One recurring speculation claims that Jonathan has been secretly recording a concept album that fuses classical vocals with symphonic metal, a project that would marry his known vocal style with his private love for complex, aggressive music. Another theory suggests that he's been approached for film or television scoring and might pivot into composition rather than performance. Then, there are whispers that he's working with producers outside the classical world entirely, hinting at a possible move toward crossover pop. But here's the truth: none of this is confirmed, and that's exactly how Jonathan seems to want it. He has never responded to speculation, never teased fans with cryptic marketing tactics, never played the PR game. His social media remains minimal. His interviews are intentional, and when he does speak, it's usually about the music, not the myth. The only consistent facts are deeds. He still performs, still records, and still connects with fans on his own terms. The rumors, as thrilling as they sound, remain just that, rumors. And yet part of Jonathan's allure is that you can't quite rule them out either. He's proven time and again that he's full of surprises. After all, no one predicted the shy teen from Britain's Got Talent would become one of the most beloved tenors of his generation. So maybe, just maybe, the next surprise is already in motion, happening quietly behind the scenes. And if history tells us anything, it's that Jonathan Antoine never announces change with a bang. He lets it build until it sings. When Jonathan Antoine first captured the world's attention on Britain's Got Talent, American audiences embraced him instantly. His voice, a thunderous, tear-jerking force of nature, was broadcast across YouTube, talk shows, and talent show recaps from Los Angeles to New York. Many believed they had discovered the next great classical star. But what they didn't see, what America's Got Talent never told them, is everything that came after. They didn't witness the quiet battles with anxiety, the slow-burning war with self-image, or the long road toward a mental health diagnosis that would finally bring clarity to years of inner conflict. They didn't hear the metal playlist behind closed doors, the artistic restlessness or the tension between public perception and private passion. They saw a singer, but not the man. They saw applause, but not the isolation that followed it. And perhaps most importantly, they missed the evolution. Because while the viral video faded from trending lists, Jonathan Antoine was undergoing a transformation more profound than any camera could capture. He wasn't just improving his technique, he was redefining himself as a human being. What Americans missed wasn't a scandal or a dramatic fall from grace. They missed the quieter, more powerful narrative, the story of an artist who chose authenticity over attention and peace over performance. They missed a young man who turned down the temptation to be everywhere so he could be fully present where it mattered. In an era when fame demands exposure, Jonathan Antoine chose something far rarer, boundaries. And in doing so, he revealed a different kind of brilliance, not just in voice, but in character. So the next time you hear his name, remember, the most extraordinary parts of Jonathan Antoine's journey aren't the ones you saw on stage. They're the ones that happened when no one was watching.